Hey y'all, in this video we're going to go over the evolution notes for honor zoology, and this is the first video of two parts of evolution notes. Right? So evolution encompasses all changes in the characteristics and diversity of life on Earth throughout its history. For purposes of our class, we're just going to give a brief overview of what evolution is and talk mostly about natural selection, right? A lot of this you probably learned in your freshman biology class. So, evolution is the biological change process by which descendants come to differ from their ancestors. And when we talk about a species, we're talking about it's a group of organisms that can reproduce and have fertile offspring. So that's what defines something as its own species. Okay, so there's a few things to remember about evolution. You might recall these from your freshman biology class. Is the first thing is that individuals cannot evolve. It's the populations that evolve. So when we say a species is evolving, we're not talking about just one individual animal within that population. We're talking about the group as a whole. All right. The second thing is that natural selection is the mechanism for evolution. We're going to talk more about that here shortly. And then that evolution occurs by chance. All right. So within evolution, the word variation will come up quite a bit. So variation is a difference in a physical trait among individuals in the same group to which it belongs. And a couple of different places or examples of variation was when Darwin went to the Galapagos Islands. He noted variation within different species. The birds here are finches that he studied, and he noticed variation among their beaks, which ended up relating to what they would consume, whether it be like hard nuts and seeds or like berries and softer things. Right? Then he noticed a variation among two different types of tortoises. The one on the bottom here has this higher arch in his shell versus the one on the top here does not have that. So that variation caused their diets to be different of what they could reach up and eat, lower to the ground or higher off the ground. All right, so an adaptation is a feature that allows an organism to better survive in its environment. Species are able to adapt to their environment, and adaptations can lead to genetic change in a population. So when we talk about an adaptation and when evolution, we're not just talking about like adapting in a way of like getting used to something. Like, if there's a lot of traffic on your way to school, you adapt by going 5 minutes early. We're talking about something like genetically linked. So, for instance, this picture here is of two peppered moths, one white, one black, and the color of them led to some being able to survive at certain points. Originally, the trees that they liked to hang out on were very light colored, and so the whiter moths blended in more and were less likely to be eaten by birds. The darker ones were easier for the birds to spot, and therefore they led to eating more, being eaten more. Then as industries grew, there was a lot of soot that then covered the trees. The trees became darker, like they were now darker colored because of the soot. Thus, the white ones stood out more, and the black ones were more camouflaged against the soot. Therefore, it led to a shift, and that the black ones survived more versus the whiter moths were eaten more. So that the color of the moth is the adaptation, and it can lead to that amount of genetic change within that moth population as this the color of them of there's more black versus white ones and that kind of thing. So that's just one example of it with the peppered moths. All right, moving on. So, artificial selection is the process by which humans select traits through breeding. Humans act as a selective agent in this case. So, for instance, dog breeding, breeders would want certain traits like cuteness, for instance. They don't want to breed the ugly dogs because nobody, people aren't going to want to pay a lot of money for an ugly dog. Or if for livestock with cows, they want the cows that are big or produce a lot of milk. In horse racing, they want to breed the faster running horses for races. So they're going to pick out the traits that they want their offspring to have. All right. Versus natural selection, which we focus on in this course, is the mechanism by which individuals that have inherited beneficial adaptations produce more offspring on average than do other individuals. So the environment in this case is the selective agent. Like with the moths, the environment, there was a lot of factors, but the environment selected which ones ended up surviving based on who was more likely to be killed by the birds. All right. So heritability is the ability of a trait to be passed down. So with those moths, that color that they were was something that can be passed down. If a trait's not something that's heritable, then it's not really a factor in this case. All right. All right. So there's four main principles on the theory of natural selection. The first is variation. That's the heritable differences that exist in every population. There's overproduction, or rather overpopulation, will result in competition and not all will survive. The third is adaptation. One variation of a trait may be better suited for survival. And then the fourth thing is descent with modification. The natural selection will result in a species with adaptations well suited for survival in the environment, right? The term fitness comes up a lot when you're talking about natural selection, and fitness is the measure of survival ability and the ability to produce more offspring. So if a species is fit, it's just talking about the fact that it can survive and that it can reproduce. If the species can't reproduce, then they're going to die off because there's, you know, nothing left. All right. All right, so let's talk about some examples of natural selection in action. There's a few of them we're going to focus on here. The first being camouflage. It's a defense mechanism or tactic that organisms use to disguise their appearance, and they usually blend in with their surroundings. And they'll use camouflage to either mask their location, their identity, or even their movement. And in this picture, it looks just like the forest floor, and you may have seen it before. But in the middle of this picture, there is actually a copperhead snake. He blends in quite nicely because of his camouflage. If you haven't found him yet, he is right here in the center. If you can kind of see right through here and follow my mouse, you'll see him. He's got little Hershey Kiss shapes along his sides, but he does quite a good job at camouflaging, and an unsuspecting hiker could easily step on him. All right, and then have a really bad day after that. All right, next up is industrial melanism. It's the darkness of the skin, the feathers, or the fur. It's acquired by a population of animals living in an industrial region where the environment is soot darkened. And we've already talked about this example a few slides ago of the peppered moth, so I won't go back over it again. All right, next up is mimicry. Mimicry is the superficial resemblance of two or more organisms that are not closely related taxonomy. The resemblance confers an advantage such as protection from predation because they're able to deceive like the other one. So in this case, we have two different butterflies. One is poisonous when eaten, the other one is not. If you look closely, you can notice the subtle differences in their patterns. But to, just a random animal, just spotting it from a distance, they're not going to take account that those minor things of like, hey, should I eat this or should I not eat this? All right. Another example of the mimicry is with snakes, the coral and the king snake. The rhyme is red on Jack, kill a fellow. Red on black won't hurt Jack. Very useful rhyme here in Georgia because we do have these snakes. But if you notice this one on the left, the red and yellow are touching. So this guy is a coral snake and you don't want to come near him, versus this one on the right here. You have red and black touching, and the yellow and red never touch, meaning this is a king snake. And, while you probably want to just stay away from a snake because, they're snakes, it's not actually venomous. It could still bite you, but it doesn't have venom. All right. Next up is warning coloration. Some animals will have warning coloration to warn you that they have venom, spines, stingers, they might have a foul scent, or they're toxic in some way. And it's just a way to tell predators of like, hey, don't eat me because I can kill you. So like one great example of this is, of course, poison dart frogs. The advertisement of their colors will generally be of bright colors such as red, orange, and yellow are very common, or it could be contrasting colors such as black and white or black and yellow to warn off predators. All right, then next is disruptive coloration. This is also called disruptive camouflage or disruptive patterning. It's a form of camouflage that works by breaking up the outlines of the animal with a strongly contrasting pattern. So like, for instance, zebras, it breaks up the outline of the individual zebra when they're in a herd, because all the black and white stripes are, kind of going different directions in this photo. So it's hard for a predator to see exactly, figuring out what they're looking at exactly, or where the individuals are within the group. Next up is counter shading. It's a type of coloration commonly found in animals and means that the animal's back, or the dorsal side of the animal, is dark while its underside or ventral side is light. The shading helps the animal blend in with its surroundings generally. For instance, with like sharks and other fish that have this, the light side on the underneath, as a predator is looking up, the white belly will blend in with the lightness coming from above, versus if they're looking down in the water at it, the dark top side blends in with the darkness of the bottom of the ocean. All right, and then lastly, we have eye spots, which is technically a form of mimicry, in which they'll have spots on the body that resembles an eye of typically a different animal to deceive potential predators or prey species. So it draws attention away from their vulnerable parts, such as their head, if it's like on a different part, or it can make them appear inedible or very dangerous looking. So, for instance, like this moth here makes his eyes look way more terrifying. The frog has the eyes on its backside, so it can confuse a predator on where it's, which side is the head, and allow the frog to like figure out a path to get out of there, kind of thing. So, but anyway, that is it for this set of notes. Remember, there is a part 2 for evolution notes, but if you have any questions, please let me know.